No intro, straight onto the guides. Starting off with Ryan, one of the most important aspects is to time your pressure with your other DPS, as I give an example of here.
Fitzyhere, soon as Lucio tank gets bubbled, where's the angle? McCree should be here. And if McCree was here, look how much attention the Reinhardt is baiting. All 6 players are looking at the Reinhardt right now. Pair this angle with McCree, Lucio, and even a high charge Zarya. You're killing at least a squishy hero. And this is how you play Brawl. Reinhardt goes in, again, where's the angle? Now Oxygen stand backs out. And now Kree and Mei push in. And now Mei and Kree disengage. And now Reinhardt goes in.
Simple solutions to fixing this is to call when and where you're engaging, and to take a quick glimpse at your backline before you engage. The second most important aspect is to clear high grounds in order to deny the enemy team from high ground angles, and to enable your DPS to use that high ground. Here's an example on Volskaya's second point attack, where you path up the stairs to clear any enemies playing this high ground before perhaps wanting to drop on point. You may even want to path all the way around to fully clear high ground before dropping. Speaking of pathing, you may also be inclined to do some unorthodox rotations in order to catch the enemy team off guard, as NatterOW explains here.
I'll give you an example here. Okay, the enemy team is playing over here. You decide you guys want to rotate over here. Now, when you're here in this little area, this is what I like to call, it's called a rotation bait. Now, when you're in this decision, when you go here, where do they think you're going?
You're going to go right.
Yes, but where can you actually go?
Stairs, or
you can go here, here, or you can also double back, right? Now, why does this work? Why does this concept work? They can't see you. People are dumb. they can't see you, right? And when they can't see you, they have no idea where people are going. So, and they sort of assume, right? They assume, hey, they're going this way, then they're probably gonna go over here. That's because that's what most people do.
Lastly, fix up on your micro. Try not to waste any shield before the fight begins, and play dirty with your shatter, meaning that you utilize your team's resources, such as Lucio Amp, to help you land a shatter past the enemy team by surprise, or you can flank shatter, similar to the one in my Rhine dive. Moving on to D.Va. Before I begin, I did do a D.Va VOD with Spilo a few months back, and I think it's still extremely useful for 99% of D.Va players out there, since it covers a lot of ground, especially considering it's timestamped. Anyways, the fundamental behind D.Va is to time your angle pressure when your Reinhardt engages, instead of stacking main. If you're just going to sit behind your Reinhardt shield, you might as well play Zarya. The next layer to that is to mark flanks and angles, especially up against hard flanking DPS heroes. Here's a visual example on Hanamura, where my D.Va doesn't mark this McCree, and as a result, he ends up farming high noon very quickly, whilst we slowly have our resources drained over time. On a more Brawl specific level, you can also set up mini dives with your Lucio onto backline. Here's an example from the same team I coach, One Trickers, having the Lucio and D.Va essentially dive straight onto the Baptiste, which ends up forcing lamp. The micro isn't perfect, but if you force lamp, that's plenty of value, and be sure to not overstay your welcome. Moving on to Mei. This is arguably the most complex hero in Brawl due to her wall, so I'll try my best to summarize the 4 main points of Mei's wall into the acronym TLVC. The T stands for your timing. Essentially, if you're going to split a hero, such as Reinhardt, you need to make sure that your team are ready to follow up. If your team are 15 to 20 meters behind your Mei wall, it's likely your wall is not going to get any value. You may also not want to wall too early, especially a main tank, as they'll have full resources such as a full shield to help them survive. The L stands for line of sight. This means you wall to block line of sight from one target to their team. Here's a visual example that I go through here.
Say what you can do is you can Mei wall this Reinhardt, even though it doesn't technically split him because it's too wide of a map, obviously. What it will do is block LOS. So if you wall behind the Reinhardt, he can't heal, and she can't do damage. This Reinhardt is free. So wall this Reinhardt and then finish him off so he can't get healed, and you can kill him. But you don't end up actually doing that. You end up not utilizing your wall.
The V stands for verticality. For instance, putting immobile heroes in places where they couldn't reach before. On escort or hybrid maps, you should try and utilize the cart to gain some additional height, with King's third point attack being a prime example. The C stands for clearing, more specifically, clearing the opposing Mei. If the Mei is stacked with a Reinhardt and you're trying to push through a narrow choke, wall in front of the entire enemy team so that they can't immediately counter wall and so you can speed past the choke. Here's an example on King's second point attack, where you wall off the Mei to speed past the narrow choke. If the Mei is split with her team, most of the time you can simply wall off the Mei and you should be able to take a 6v5 as I explain here. You can wall this Mei, you guys can just rush and then take the 6v5, and your McCree doesn't even have to play this angle. And because it's gonna take quite a long time, right, for her to trot all the way back to her team, you guys can take the 6v5, flash the Reinhardt, and then rush him, right? Now, one thing you could do if you're really extra smart and big brain is wait for bubbles, because bubbles going to be the main counter to the Reinhardt getting flashed. But even then, you guys could just still win with the 65. And by the time the Mei walks all the way around, it's going to be too late. They're going to be at low HP. Maybe you force an ultimate or two, and then you guys win this space over here, this entire space, and then you guys can start taking angles and whatnot.
Just saying that's smart.
Yeah. Big brain. Now, in some maps, that doesn't work, because this rotation here, for example, is quite long. On maps like Iconward, first point, defense, if the Mei's playing by right side mini, and if you wall off the Mei, she can just walk through the mini health pack room and wall off choke anyway. Whereas this like little trot thing takes like 5 seconds, which is too long. Maps like King's Row, if you wall off the Mei there, then she's obviously going to have a long way to walk back to her core, and then you guys can again rush and take the 65. Before I move on, check out this Mei Reddit post I made in the description for more details. Moving on to McCree. Linking back to that Ryan clip at the start, make sure you time your pressure when your Reinhardt engages. Additionally, linking back to that concept of having D.Va Lucio mini dives, you can often clear or zone high grounds to allow your D.Va Lucio to take them, as Natter shows and explains here.
As you know, D.Va, Lucio, Bap, even Mei to some extent, you don't need to be stacked on the Ryan right now. You can do something else. And what's it something you can do? You know that the enemy team is abusing these high grounds, right? Like this high ground over here, this high ground over here. You can send a little kill squad to go push that. You'll see the D.Va, you'll see the Lucio, and the Bap. All together as a little high ground, little kill squad. They're ready to fight, right? And they'll push that high ground and they'll catch Valentine there who's trying to go for an off angle. You can use ultimates like McCree ult or even Square to force pressure off your Reinhardt and then have your little kill squad go pressure people on the sides.
Additional things to mention is to not High Noon and Matrix at the same time, as they are both designed to zone space, hence you only need one. For the penultimate tip, against dive comps, you want to find a balance between being isolated and being stacked with your core. Here's an example on Busan Sanctuary, where you can soft off angle as shown in green, but you shouldn't go too far forward or go on some crazy flank as shown in red, as you'll likely get engulfed by the enemy team's dive heroes. Lastly, you may want to half flank, but ensure you time this well, as Spilo explains here.
Reason why it's important to clarify is in the Brawl mirror. One of the limitations of Brawl is if it's very slow. If I see McCree like up here, like who on Brawl can really stop that? Bap can shoot it a little bit, their McCree can shoot a little bit, but nobody can like reach it and stop it or deny the angle. There's no ball, there's no tracer, there's no D.Va, there's no monkey. But the thing is you have to time them very well. Your team has to be in a position to push, because even if you don't kill anybody, you want to get value out of the attention that you buy, and if you do it by yourself, you're just gonna feed. It's a legitimate playstyle. You're not gonna find teams that are gonna be consistent at countering this until you get to Overwatch League, and even then, not even really.
A small nuance I would add is that since Brawl teams are running D.Va over Zarya, who can mark your flank, I would time your hard flanks later during the team fight instead of doing it early, where you are less likely to get forced out. Moving on to the main support, Lucio. There isn't too much to say aside to take high grounds and coordinate dives with your D.Va in the mid fight, as mentioned prior, and to stay on heals unless you're pushing in or you're kiting. There's just no point on staying on speed if your team are busy posturing and aren't engaging or disengaging. However, Lucio also has a secondary job, which is to deter flankers such as Bull, Tracer, Reaper or Sombra, as Spilo explains here, and as I give an example of in the Overwatch League here as well.
What you can do is Lucio is, as your team is engaging frontline, your job is to deny these guys. Sombra, Tracer, Reaper, Ball. They're all flankers, but they all have relatively low range damage. So you can deny them by spamming in the direction. They get too close, you boop them away. Your heal aura, you're like the back door. You're like, stay away, stay away, stay away, stay away. You keep them away. This allows your team to ignore this off angle the enemy team has and focus on the front line, and you can deny the pressure of this off angle. Let's say this was like a Widow on a flank or a Kree on a flank. You could either go in and duel them if it was like a Widow, not a Kree, or you could get guys, they're behind us, let's speed so fast that this off angle gets literally left behind, it's not doing anything.
It's a visual example of Funny Astro from the Philadelphia Fusion doing this against Choice A1 on the Tracer from the Guangzhou Charge. And as you can see, it's quite difficult for him to reach the Fusion's backline. Moving on to the flex support, Baptiste. A key fundamental which I hammered on in my updated Baptiste guide and my 8-hour Overwatch guide is to nail down your shoot heal rhythm. This allows you to charge window faster and can also relieve pressure off your Reinhardt when both Reinhardts are swinging. In terms of lamp usage, obviously try and toss it around corners and use it for when tanks are critical HP and are going to die. However, building off this, you can aggressively turn corners in order to give you lamp advantage and to make it harder for the enemy team to lamp, as Natter explains here.
When you aggressively turn the corner like this, you take the corner from them and you essentially have a lamp spot so your Ryan can keep going or stabilize, and they have no lamp spot. Why does Mei change stuff here? So let's say we push in like this and then the Mei just walls off our Ryan. What happens then? Our Ryan dies, right? So when we sort of aggressively turn the corner, if they don't have wall, it's free. If they do have wall, we need to make sure, again, our Mei is in a position that preferably isn't like fully stacked with our Ryan, so that if they do wall off our Ryan, our Mei can counter wall.
Likewise to McCree High Noon, you can also zone space to allow your more mobile heroes, such as D.Va or Lucio, to take that space. I recommend watching the start of the McCree section for more details. With some more elaboration on Matrix, you want to place it either on corners or on open space, With respect to the former, matrixing around corners link back to that concept about aggressively turning corners, which not only give you lamp advantage, but can also make it easier for you to land your shoot heals, as you have direct line of sight onto both teams. Alternatively, with respect to the latter, placing matrix in open space would allow you to scatter the enemy team and force them to either retreat to the nearest corner, or to engage straight into your window, as StormCrowProductions explains here.
If they're at this line, specifically tanks probably at this line of engagement, then that tells me one of two things. Number one, right when they have to choose where to go, they either need to go forward into my window or they have to go back to the corner. But look at this distance, right? This distance is pretty far going backwards. The distance over here is pretty far too. So they're kind of stuck in the middle, which is where my point number 2 comes in. The reason that you're waiting until this line of engagement is because you're forcing them in an awkward position to where they're unable to get to a safe position in time. They have to then decide on the fly, what's a good idea? Do I back away? Do I go fight now? What do I do?
Here's another example on the Barney second point attack, where you use matrix when the enemy frontline reach the red dotted line on high ground. This then places them in an awkward position in open space, where they don't have any cover, and you and your team deal double the damage. Lastly, a very important aspect to playing Baptiste in Brawl is, when you're playing against dive comps, to position yourself in enclosed spaces which are close to point, as Natter explains here.
You think about it, this wall right here denies the enemy team, right? Like, the only way that BH can actually do damage is from here or here, which is like pretty good. Why? Because that can just be shielded off. And if the ball or someone pushes in here, guess what? That's a free wall. So essentially, in this enclosed area, you can sort of block a lot of the angles, and you can force point because your D.Va or Mei can go point, and your Bap can just heal that. So it's a very like smart spot that your team can play, and you can sort of live.
Here's another example on Icon Water second point attack, where the enemy team don't have many angles on you, but you can still support KarQ if your D.Va or Mei want to force point. Here's another example on Busan Sanctuary, where you're again close to point, but you can use Dojo and the point itself as forms of cover. This positioning is super important when trying to force point against dive comps. Moving on to the macro section, here's a clip from Thor explaining how to play Brawl against general compositions, which especially apply to poke and dive.
You want to force these mid-fight situations because of your high sustain. You can most likely survive any mid-fight engagements, and also your close range damage will win you the fight and either force the fight if you just go run into the enemies and they have to peel for their backline most of the time, or you just rotate to point or to the objective. You want to use your resources always to reduce the incoming damage or fortify on an objective when you're defending, so that the enemies are forced to come into this close range fight and are not able to basically pick you apart from a long distance. You always also want to make sure that the incoming damage is reduced to tops one angle.
Lastly, I'll be quickly rattling through some key variations to take note of. Starting off with the Symmetra Variation. In short, utilize your Ryan Shield to safely farm up your beam damage, look for TP bombs in the mid-fight, and also use your turrets to mark flanks. You can also utilize your TP to do quirky rotations, or to flat out skip rotations, as StormCrowProductions shows here.
We TP, I go around this way, they're not going to be set up in time to stop us from pushing off this high ground. We're going to push off these high grounds, and we're either going to force them to drop towards the point, or we're going to force them to fight us. Either way, it's advantageous for us because we have stopped them from having this high ground control here. All Fusion needs to do is just clear the rest of the high ground, and that's exactly what they're doing.
In the Doomfist Variation, I'll leave this to Temporal to quickly explain how this variation works.
The Doomfist Brawl comp wants to engage in such a way that their Doomfist and their core push revivals at the same time. Whereas Revival wants to go, we have superior poke with our Mei and with our McCree, so we will stay just outside of the distance that you guys can commit at while getting a bit of a poke advantage. The fact that we can do that for an extended period of time will eventually force your Doomfist to commit. When your Doomfist commits, everyone on Revival, except Cloudy, wants to commit to peeling this Doomfist while they kite back. Okay. This right here is the committal from Speedily, and they're strengthening their aggression window with beat. And if we turned around, we would see that the front line of American Tornado is pushing in hard.
In the Sigma and or Hanzo variation, you're essentially playing a spammier Brawl looking to play distance. For instance, on Icon Wall 3rd point defense, Sigma and the DPS could be sat up on high ground providing a crossfire, whilst having rotational options to play more passive or deepen the angle. In the Orisa variation, you're looking to essentially W key on maps with enclosed, narrow spaces with few angles, as Orisa isn't great against angles. Make sure to shield and aggressively halt first, then Ryan pushes up and swings using the shield and the halts, and then he backs out with his own shield. Lastly, in the Tracer variation, you want to set up a pincer by going directly behind the enemy team whilst your frontline pushes in. Here's Pelican in the Overwatch League pincering the Chengdu Hunters, encouraging their Brig Zen to rotate, forcing recall, and putting pressure on D.Va from angles where she can't hide from. The Tracer variation is most viable when playing against glass cannon type comps and up against DPS players who love to half flank, but don't want Tracer Brawl into Sim Mei or McCree. Well, that's the video, until next time.